Hi, and welcome to another podcast of Ian Wallace, the Messed Up Counsellor. Today we're going to look at choice and decisions and barriers to choice and decisions, and maybe look at what might those barriers be, how we might reflect on them, and how we might make better choice and decisions from anything in our life, really. And today I'm talking to Paul Good, who is a psychotherapist of many years standing, and works with all sorts of different clients, or has done in the past.
Yes, I'm retired now.
Unfortunately, you're retired now, Paul, and I've dragged you out of retirement to come and talk to me today. But hopefully we can have some kind of conversations around that, and it might stimulate people's ideas and understanding about that, you know. And we will see things differently.
Yeah.
Because we're different people, we come from different places with that, you know. So kind of my idea is that when people are trying to make choices and decisions, if it's purely for themselves, i.e. there's only them in their world and their life that would be affected by a choice and decision, then it's sometimes easier. But when there's other people in their life who might be affected by the choice and decision, then sometimes those people's ideas, needs, requirements are more central to our thoughts, our ideas. So say, for example, we've got a career person who hates being in the job they're in, male or female. And at home, they've got people who rely on an income stream for providing everything that they need. So their choice and decision might be restricted by that fact that I can't do what I want to do because these other people might be affected by it. And I'm wondering if that's something that you would have a different view on.
Well, possibly. I think what you're highlighting there is that we can go down a path which may be driven by a choice, or it could be driven by other factors. You know, you may be pressurized into doing something, may be expected of you to do something, and you go down a particular path, but then that in itself might then restrict the options and choices. As you mentioned, you know, they could have a family, income stream, commitments, all sorts of things like that. That might mean the individual can feel trapped. They might want to do something completely different and chuck all this out and go down a different career path, but that will have all sorts of consequences, and there could be financial ones and all sorts of things, and so they just feel unable to do it. But I do wonder sometimes when you start off down a particular path, just how many times we make the choice, or whether we just happen to fall into it.
Synchronicity and the universe provides.
Well, and I'm partly thinking of myself here. I've always envied those people who say, perhaps if they're at school, if you say, what do you want to do when you're at school? I want to go to university and become a whatever.
Yeah.
And they're single-minded, and they know where they're heading. Whether it turns out to be appropriate or not is another matter, but I've always envied people who seem to have that very clear in their mind. They know what they want to do, they know where they're going to study, they know where it's going to lead, and they have a goal, an end point, an aim. I've never been one of those persons.
I think a vast majority of the people have.
Yes. You know, I think back to when I was at school and doing A-levels. I did A-levels because I went to a grammar school, and it was expected of you to do A-levels if you were able to do it. I didn't really know what subjects to do. I ended up doing 3 subjects that 2 were maths and applied maths, were boring. Did I want to be a mathematician? No. Did I want to go to university? No. Did I know what I wanted to do? No. I dabbled with several sandwich courses, trying to get on them, and that failed. And it was my mother who, in desperation, thought of one of my cousins who worked for Unilever, and I think might have worked at Unilever's head office, I don't know, and suggested, well, they've got a lot of companies that big, she might know. So Mum got in touch with her sister, who got in touch with the relevant daughter, and gave me an address to write to or phone or whatever. And I got in touch, was sent a list. And as part of this process, my mother reminded me that at the end of the school year, in some of the years, we had a maths teacher who had been involved with computer programming at the really early stages and would have us drawing flowcharts of things like how to make a cup of tea. And I quite liked this, and good old mum remembered that I would come home talking about this and showing the drawings and things on the flowchart. And she said, well, that's got something to do with computers, maybe that's worth trying. And so, all right then, so I get in touch with Unilever. They sent me a list of all their subsidiaries. I've contacted several, one of which was Elida Gibbs, as it was called then, based in Marble Arch. We lived in North London. And they took me on as a trainee computer programmer. And the rest is history. Did I want to do it at early stage? No. Any thoughts of doing it? No. Am I glad I did it? Probably. It suited my personality and my character, but I didn't know anything about that then.
No.
Was it easy for me? No, at times it was very difficult. And, led to IT management and things like that. But, one thing leads to another.
It can do. Yeah.
And I suppose, picking up on your point about making choices, I did change career late in my life. Not married, not engaged, didn't have a partner then, didn't have kids. So, and was financially secure. So I didn't have those things to stop me. But there was still a psychological challenge of going back to, uni effectively, studying this completely different subject, which in itself I sort of drifted into. And that came about purely by chance. And that led to me getting a job full-time in the NHS in primary care mental health once I qualified as a counsellor. Am I glad I did that? Very much so. And it gave me a completely different insight. But I was free to do that because I didn't have to think of others.
Yeah.
But I wasn't thinking of me, as it were. I just sort of drifted. Yeah. Maybe what this says is I've drifted into things, and it's other people who've perhaps steered me down a particular path, but not forcefully, almost out of desperation.
Yeah.
But I know some people are pushed down because the family expects this to happen and then that to happen and that to happen, and that must be pretty awful if they don't want to do it.
Well, I get people in the room with me working when I'm counselling, whereby they will have blocks to what they want to do.
Yeah.
And they'll be trying to find through my work, connecting to me, of the direction, the path, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
But when they start thinking about what they'd like to do or how they would like to progress or where they'd like to get to, they have this idea in their head that the people around them who will be affected by the choice, they think this person won't like this, that or the other. They don't have a conversation. They don't have a verbal dialogue with them. They kind of go into this process of self-thinking about the whole shebang and what it will be and what it won't be and how it would and how it might not. And that actually sometimes stops them.
Oh, I agree. And I think in a lot of cases, with an awful lot of us, and I'm sure I've done this in the past, you do the what will people think
indeed
game, as it were.
You
imagine, and I've heard clients talking like this, whatever the situation is, whether it's making a change in their career or whatever it is, it's what will people think. I know my mum used to talk about this. So you will limit what you do, your choices, your options, for fear of other people's reactions.
Indeed.
Which is different to sort of, will it impact them? Yes, you may decide not to do something because you know that it could have a negative impact on people close to you. But I think in an awful lot of things, we do restrict ourselves or behave in particular ways because we imagine how others are going to react, what they're going to say. So we do all that mind reading. And as you said, we don't check it out with the people, and that can often be part of the psychotherapy work is what do you imagine they would say, and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, which is a good starting point, but until you actually have that conversation,
Yeah.
you can't know, can you?
No.
You
no,
know.
no.
And it's surprised how many people in the counselling room, when they start saying "I think" and they use those words,
Yes.
for me, I then kind of like just challenge it. I say, well, actually, then do you know?
Yes.
Because the think is all in here.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Whereby if it's not out of here somewhere else, how do you know?
That's right.
You know, and people can go, oh. You know.
Well, classically, it can be. So, what's the evidence for that?
Indeed. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Which is using a particular approach, and that really sort of makes it more concrete. How much of this is imagined, speculative, and of course that in itself can be driven by all sorts of personal history.
Of course.
And then wanting to avoid things because they subconsciously fear a reaction. It could be a fear of being alone if they did something or said something because their friends wouldn't like it and would ostracize them.
Yeah.
When nothing could be further than the truth, perhaps. But
possibly.
That's what they imagine.
Yes.
That's what they think.
Yeah.
And then I suppose you get into the debate then, is it what you think or is it what you feel? Because there could be feelings driving it, which could be fear, whatever, as well as thinking. So, which comes first?
Yeah, absolutely, totally. And those historical drivers that we all have.
Yes.
That say you should be this or you should be that or you should be the other.
Shoulds, oughts, musts.
Indeed. they kind of get involved in that, don't they?
They absolutely do.
You know.
I've got to do this. I must do this. I shouldn't do that because if I do, then no. But sometimes helping the process, you're just concretifying, as it were, if that's a word, is so, well, I shouldn't do that because what would happen? And they just have the rule rather than have unpicked it and identified or begun to explore, well, what am I afraid of? Why don't I do this? What are the risks? What are the consequences? What are the ways around it?
Indeed.
Of mitigating it? Because, yes, a lot of people will dismiss options, certainly if you're talking perhaps career, when there may be ways of getting there, but via another route.
Yeah.
And possibly, I don't know, doing something part-time or taking a more gradual approach.
Yeah, like a transitional process.
Yeah.
Yeah, instead of just stop, start.
That's right.
You know.
Which, interestingly, you mentioned that, thinking back, is what I did when I did the career change. I was sort of, had this idea of getting into something else and not spending the rest of my career in IT, even though I've been doing it for, 30 years or whatever it was. And so changed my job to something that was part-time, which provided enough income to keep the wolf from the door, as it were, and pay the bills, but then gave me some free time to try this other thing, which didn't work out. And then I was left with this extra time. It's sort of, well, what shall I do now?
Yeah. Well, how shall I fill it?
How shall I fill it? I felt guilty for not doing something. But I was fortunate enough to have that handover, that transition period, where I was able to do the two things in parallel, the IT work and start doing the retraining for counselling and psychotherapy in parallel, rather than chop one and then start the other and have to deal with the consequences of that.
Indeed. And that's really hard sometimes for people to grasp that there is a possible option of halfway house, if you like, transition process, because they say, well, I don't want to do that and I want to do this, but they don't think of that transitional process. That could be a year, 2 years, 3 years, depending on what they want to do in order to transfer across.
And I think that's where talking it through with somebody else, whatever their role, professional role it might be, or even a friend, it doesn't have to be a professional, to having that detached person, the outsider looking in, to be able to say, well, what about this? Have you thought about that? Not that they're trying to come up with the answers, but just offering other perspectives. I think when I first started doing my counselling training, we were looking at Gerard Egan's skilled helper model, and I think he calls it pump priming. So you're not offering answers, but you're popping in some additional thoughts which might be a bit tangential, but nonetheless, and in the old days we used to call it brainstorming.
Yes. Indeed.
You know,
Blue
don't-
sky thinking.
Yeah, blue
Yeah.
sky thinking. Don't limit
So-
yourself. Just come out with ideas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't dismiss them.
Yeah.
And then look at each one, and decide. Well, that might have something in it. I hadn't thought of that one.
Yeah. I suppose if you do it with a friend, though, then that friend might be affected by your choice and decision. So they may maneuver you down a path without necessarily realising sometimes.
I think that, yes, the drawback with friends or anybody close to you is it's human nature. They may want to come up with the ready answer or feel obliged to fix.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you do this? As if that's a solution to it all. And because they we all do it. It's human nature. We want to help.
We do.
But really what you want is someone who's deliberately not going to do that, but help encourage the unpicking and the tangential thinking and exploring.
Yeah. I find that when people try and do that in their head, when they try and think about what they want, don't want, it's actually harder because of all those other messages, scripts, ideas that are coming from other people.
Oh.
So writing things down clarifies it in a very strange kind of real way, that once it's on a piece of paper it becomes different.
Well, you're getting it out.
Yes.
It's not all in your head,
There.
not swirling around.
Yeah.
You're making it more concrete.
Indeed.
Whatever it is you're doing. And yes, you could be listing possibilities. You could be doing a pros and cons list.
Indeed.
Something I was used to in my former career.
Yeah.
Advantages, disadvantages, cost-benefit analysis, all that kind of thing. But it's getting it out.
Indeed.
And I think, yes, there is something that now you're looking at it on paper. Oh, okay. And that might in itself show a particular pattern
Indeed.
coming out
Yeah.
that you weren't aware of until you did it.
Mm.
And of course, in our field, journaling is something that is often used.
Mm.
But yeah, definitely getting it out, getting it down on paper, or doing whatever might help. It could be using lots of post-it notes.
Yeah.
Being creative.
Yeah.
Drawing
Yeah.
things, whatever
Yeah.
works for that individual, can be hugely beneficial, and not expecting to come up with a nice quick fix straight away.
Yeah. And I don't think we can, generally speaking, do that nice quick fix straight away process
No.
because of all those other voices that's going on in our heads and
yeah.
ideas and stuff, and how it might affect or might not affect other people.
And we'll be conditioned by our upbringing.
Mm.
Almost stating the obvious here. The cultural expectations, the family expectations,
Indeed.
possibly the gender expectations, the society expectations,
Indeed.
age expectations.
Yeah.
It's amazing what gets triggered. When I was in my 30s, I bought a Ford XR3i car.
Posh.
It was a Ford Escort, but it was the go faster one.
Yeah.
The boy racer, as it was
Yes.
called. And where I worked then, when I told people I got this, and I must have been about, 35-ish, maybe even a bit older. A number of people's reaction was immediately and automatically, "What, you? A boy racer?" And some of them did say, "At your age." And of course you hear of people much older doing something, and it's sort of buying the Harley Davidson or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So there are all sorts of expectations that exist. And a lot of them are very sort of subliminal, subtle types of things. And yeah,
Absolutely.
again, the way people react to something, I'm thinking of doing this. What? That's going to put the kibosh on it, isn't it?
Do you think that sometimes, though, that they'd like to do it but don't?
Oh, I'm sure there's a possibility that there's envy.
Yeah.
Well, I couldn't, so I don't see why you should do it.
Yeah. My restrictive process won't allow me to even contemplate that.
Yeah.
You know, but you're doing it. I wish I could.
Well, I think we will all have internally all our sets of rules.
Yeah.
And we need that to function as a society, but it can have a negative impact as well.
Yeah. I find when people have that kind of rabbit in the headlights process, don't know what to do, then the fear is usually the fear of either not being accepted or rejected.
Yes.
That's a big one for us, isn't it?
Yeah, that sort of being ostracised, not belonging,
Indeed.
not fitting. I think an
Yeah,
awful lot of what we do is driven by an inherent need and to feel that we belong
Mm.
and part of something. We are social animals,
Mm.
and not being accepted, and hence perhaps not belonging, being the odd one out
Yeah.
that stands out, that is different compared to everybody else. And of course, I think as a race, is that the right word? As a creature,
Mm.
Human beings are very much ones for doing what everybody else does,
Yeah.
because then that's going to be all right, isn't it?
Yeah. Follow the group.
Follow the group.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what it is, and okay, sometimes that can have good consequences, but sadly, in a lot of situations, I think it has hugely negative,
Yeah.
serious, bad consequences.
Yeah.
Well, it's all right because no one else is complaining. And of course, we will talk about not being the one to put our head above the parapet,
Indeed.
or to
be
be the
different.
one to get shot
Yeah.
for being different.
Yeah.
And we might internally want to be different and break free from these constraints, but oh no, I don't want to suffer the consequences of being the odd one out.
Yeah. The one that's targeted.
Yep.
I've made this choice and decision, and that's a bit scary.
Yep.
Because the group won't like me, or
Yep.
as we call it, the system
Yep.
won't like us.
And of course, sadly, organisations can perhaps use that.
Mm.
After all, look at the post office scandal
Mm.
recently.
Yeah.
There was the post office maintaining that anybody who said they were having problems was the only person,
Indeed. Yeah.
when lots of people were having the same problem.
Yeah.
But the organisation was ganging up and denying what was happening
Mm.
to make the individual feel, this is my theory, to make the individual feel isolated,
Yeah.
and powerless.
Yeah.
And so would just give in
And bring them back into line.
and bring them back into line.
Yeah. And I think that's done an awful lot from all sorts of aspects of life, cultural as well as others.
Yep. Yeah.
To become part of the group,
Yep.
you need to have the right clothes, right ideas,
Yep.
right philosophy, right cultural ideas,
The right behaviours.
right behaviours. Absolutely.
Groups of people might say, oh, it's the done thing to go out on a Friday night and get blind drunk,
Indeed.
because anybody who doesn't want to do it would be perhaps ostracised because
Yes.
there was something weird about them.
And then they call them a name or something
Yeah.
to ostracise them even further,
right.
to target them or to label
Yeah.
them. I always remember when I was growing up and I was a teenager, I was about 13, 14, and there was all the mods and rockers kind of thing going off. And there used to be Parkers, which are overcoats with the hoods and the fur around
the fur
them.
around the
Yeah.
fur trim, yeah.
And there was most of the people wore the kind of parka that had the straight edge around the bottom.
Oh, yes,
know?
yes.
And then there was these parkas that had like a fishtail,
Yes,
and they used to tie them together. And,
yes.
so everybody was buying these parkas with all the straight bottoms. And I thought, I'm not going to be part of that system. I'm going to buy one with a fishtail. And so I bought
I'm
this
going to be
parka.
daring.
I'm going to be daring. I'm going to be different.
But only in a little way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, not
Let's
too
got
big a
carried
deal.
away.
Although as a fashion aspect, they were popular.
Yeah.
And the reason why I did it was twofold. One is that I didn't want to be part of the group of mods
Yeah.
at that time, because I didn't necessarily, I didn't have a scooter that way. And the other one is that they were cheaper fishtails because everybody was buying the straight ones. And then the fishtails became very popular for the mods, and they started buying those because it was easier to keep your bum dry on the seats and things.
Yeah.
So when they started becoming popular, I waited till the price went up and I sold mine. And I thought, not now, obviously. When I was going through my training as a counsellor, we were looking at reflection and why we do what we do and the kind of personality we are. And it brought it back to mind, and I thought, that was me trying to break out of that bubble, and to be different and to be an individual. And I think to do that is freeing.
Yeah.
It freed me from that needing to have this that I couldn't afford, obviously. But it also made me realise that, yes, I could be an individual. I don't have to follow the group or the rules.
Yeah.
You know, in that sense, and that kind of made me. I don't know. It changed how I perceive things.
Yes, it's interesting how we all, perhaps, well, maybe most of us, undergo this process, but at our own speed.
Mm.
I think I've done similar things, but it's come late in life. So whether it's wearing shorts in the winter, for example,
Yeah.
which is for me, I'm being different. I'm not doing what everybody else does. Although there's a little group, as long as you see one or two people doing it, oh, that's all right then. I'm not going to be the only one.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's. I think we all do this. We're all influenced by what other people do.
Mm.
I'm sure people nowadays, whether it's cosmetic treatments or there was something on the radio or the telly recently about the cosmetic surgery and what people are doing and where it can go wrong. But it's all because they're seeing other people doing it. Or the influencers or people in the media are pushing it. So, you almost become part of that group.
Indeed.
Even if you don't know the people, but you're seeing it. So no, I think it is driven by this. Well, it's a conflict in a way, isn't it? There's the need to belong, but the desire also to be individual.
Yes. Which is not easy to go together.
And they can be really at odds. But there are brave souls who do that.
Yeah.
And they sometimes suffer the consequences.
They do.
And can be bullied, ostracised. Sadly, it shouldn't be the case just because of the way they look, the way they behave. Perhaps people nowadays are braver than they might have been in our day.
Possibly.
And so what we did was a bit more sort of careful and subtle, whether it's the fishtail on the Parker.
Yeah.
As now people are more upfront, but there's still potentially a risk to doing that and a price to pay.
Yeah, from the group or the cultural norm or whatever you want to call it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that can be really hard. And if we don't have another group to go to of people like us or people that think like us or be like us, then that can be a very lonely process.
Absolutely. And that's why I suppose support groups, be they in person or online, can be so beneficial and so helpful because you don't feel alone. Because a lot of this can feel as if you're the only one.
Yeah.
And you're battling it on your own.
Indeed.
And just knowing that you're not alone. There are other people with either the same views. And again, there's a caveat to that because that can have negative consequences.
Indeed.
But facing similar issues can be very helpful.
Yeah, and I suppose that group dynamic is that supportive aspect of I'm not alone, I'm not weird, I'm not different to a point where I'm not okay process.
But then sadly, of course, thinking of social media and the echo chambers and all of that, it can actually reinforce things that can be very bad or unhelpful. But the person is still feeling they belong and part of a group. But there's a load of negativity attached to it, negative results, without getting political.
And that might itself lend to a rejection process somewhere, because you're wanting to be part of that, so you can't be part of this,
Yeah, I maybe this is a human nature thing, that things get reduced down to them and us.
It does. Yeah, a lot of the time.
When I suppose it shouldn't. Idealistically, we should all be willing to consider other views and be able to debate it and work with it or discuss with people if the opportunities arise. But it becomes very sort of not segmented, but I'm doing a gesture which is sort of separate.
You are.
Conscious of my body language again, which is them and us. You're either with us or against us. And if you're not with us, you're against us.
And there can't be a middle ground.
And there's no middle ground.
That's right.
Well, isn't there some saying that somebody once said about whether you're either for us or against us in politics or in industry from some time ago? But
you can't be somewhere else.
It's ringing a bell.
Yeah.
But it's all or nothing. It's this or that, and that's your lot.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting you were talking about younger people. You know, in our day, there was less options of choice for all sorts of reasons. But nowadays, there is a much wider option of choice, of being more an individual, if you like. Although I don't suppose there's ever an individual. There'll always be somebody that's got similar ideas or views or fashion or whatever to come from. So I suppose that new aspect of maybe there's too much choice.
Well, yes, sometimes it's nice not to have the choice. It makes for a simple life. Doesn't mean it's going to be right. I always complain when there's all this talk about, oh, you've got choice of energy supplier, choice of broadband provider, choice of this, choice of that, choice of that. Oh, no, please, I don't want all this choice. Life's too short to be... And then you have the fear of missing out, FOMO.
Indeed.
And you think, oh, dear, it was much simpler in the old days. You've just got your gas from the gas board, electric from the electric board, and water from the... Well, water's a bit different, but... And phone from BT or the post office, and that was it. You didn't have the choice.
No.
But no, choice. It's great to have choice. But again, everything has a consequence, I suppose.
I mean, there's a positive and negative to everything, isn't there?
Yeah, of course there is.
Whether it's a positive or a negative depends on our view of it, or our interaction with it.
That's right.
You know,
and we can be the glass half full person and see it as a lot of positives, or be the glass half empty and see it as the negatives to this are this, and this. And again, perhaps just to be aware of that, because that could be limiting ourselves.
Indeed.
As a choice we may make, I think very often we do self-limit.
I think that's I don't know, maybe it's a protection thing.
Yeah.
That's self-limiting.
Yeah.
You know, it's easier if we don't.
Well,
you know?
it's perhaps the less risky option.
Yeah, you're not going to be as rejected possibly as much.
Yeah. Or better the devil you know than the devil you don't.
Yeah.
All these sayings.
Yeah.
Because if you make a choice, there's going to be a consequence, and you've got to be able to live with it.
Indeed. Yeah.
And maybe sometimes people don't consider sufficiently what the consequences might be. They might assume that this choice is all going to be sweetness and light and wonderful. And yeah, hopefully it might be, but being realistic, I would say this, wouldn't I? What about? Have you considered the consequences? And as long as people make a choice, trying to be reasonably informed, you can't do it perfectly.
No.
Then at least they've considered it and they're making an informed choice, rather than just going off into the wide blue yonder with all their fingers crossed.
Yeah. And I suppose making that informed choice means that you have to have input from somewhere else.
Yes.
Either people, education, whatever.
Knowledge, information, awareness of other things, whatever it is.
To kind of see that as a wider option.
Yeah.
You know. And that self-limiting thing that you were talking about, I think a lot of people do that without even realising it, to be fair. I think they don't even know they are self-limiting. And you'll get a lot of people in the counselling room will say and give a view of themselves. They might say, oh, you know, well, that's daft, isn't it? Or, you know, I'm being silly. Or those kind of language processes that self-limit without even realising.
Or I could never do that.
Yeah, you know.
And I think this is, you know, getting into the topic of low self-esteem, because that very much is this self-limiting. It could never happen. I can't do that. No, I don't have the ability to do that. No kind of thing. And yes, we can do it in our behaviours without realising it. We can come out with language that is demonstrating this, and we don't even realise we're doing it.
No. And I find it interesting in the room when that's happening to bring attention to it.
Yeah.
Because you know, the way I work is a bit more interactive than a lot of therapists.
Yeah.
And I'll bring that to their attention. I'll say, whose voice is that that's telling you that?
Yes.
Which voice is giving you that?
That's right.
You know, where's that voice coming from? You know, because somebody gave you that idea.
Yeah.
You weren't born with that idea, because nobody's born with the world. No. We're given the world, obviously, as we grow up. So whose voice is that? And that can be a really interesting conversation.
Absolutely. Who does it remind you of? All that kind of thing. Yes, all these imposed messages
Mm.
come from somewhere.
They do. Yeah, they have to, don't they?
Of course they do.
You know, and it might not be because the person was a bad person.
No.
To give you that.
No.
You know, I had an example the other month where somebody with low confidence, self-esteem, we were working, and their process in looking back, where is the cause,
Yes.
not the effect, was that they were constantly told by a very caring parent that, have you checked you've got the right coat? Have you checked you've got the right shoes?
Yeah.
Do you know you've got the right money?
Yeah.
Have you covered that? Have you thought of that?
Yeah.
And all that process is from a caring motivation.
That's right.
I want you to be okay. I want you to be dry. I want you to be healthy, happy, whatever. But it's set up in my client a process that says, I can't make choices. I have to check my choices out with somebody else
Yes.
in order for me to be comfortable with it.
Yeah. To get approval, to get consent.
Indeed.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and of course, in that particular example, that parent was doing it for the right reasons, but they would have been influenced by their
Indeed.
messages, culture, upbringing, baggage, whatever it is.
Yes.
And that's how it plays out through the generations.
Indeed.
It cascades down. So it definitely is nurture rather than nature.
Yeah.
In that case. Yeah. And we grow up with that and we don't realise it's going on.
No, we don't. And because a lot of it's subliminal kind of process, isn't it? It just becomes a part of our cultural norm.
Yeah.
You know, I talk about in the book that I'm doing the audio at the moment. That I came from a very insular family. Nobody came into our house. We didn't have sleepovers. We didn't have parties. We didn't have friends over. Nobody came in.
Yeah.
You know, the family was the only people that came into the house. Yeah. And I have a brother and a sister that's older than me, and there was a wedding happening, and so the invite was for only 2 children.
Yeah.
And I was the third child. I was the youngest, so I didn't get to go. You know, just because that was the way it was. That was the same for every part of the family, not just our family.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of like given about 7 or 8 to this other family in the street to be looked after for the day. And my mate and his mum and dad and brothers and such like. There was 4 or 5 brothers he had. And I'm in this house, which is a nice house, and all of a sudden there's people knocking at the door, and they're coming in, and they're, oh, yeah, how are you doing? And I haven't seen you in ages. Do you want a cup of tea? Do you want some food? And these people are coming at me. It's a weekend, and there's lots of people coming in. And I'm like sat in the corner of this room going, oh my God, who are all these people? Because I didn't know anybody apart from my friend and his family.
Yeah.
And I thought, after a while, I thought, I like this.
Yes.
I like this difference. I like this newness, this different way of working. So I said to my mate, I said, is this how it always is? Oh, yeah, open house here. Yeah. Everybody comes in. Yeah. And I said, all right. So when my family come back, I go to my family, 8-year-old, and I say, why can't I have my friend round? Why can't I do? And my family go, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. That's too far. You know. Yeah. And so I had to conform to their choices because I wasn't old enough to have the choice.
No, you didn't have the power.
You know. And it was a really interesting process to say, okay, that system, his family works that way, my family works this way. I'd rather be a bit like his family.
Yes.
But I don't have the power to do that. Yeah. So when I became a homeowner, I had parties and the street was invited in on New Year's Eve and stuff, and the door was open. And
well done you.
So I kind of like had a bit of that, but then a bit of this, and then I thought, no, I quite like that.
Yes.
You know, and it was amazing, that kind of change, that I had a choice, you know, because I didn't think I had a choice. And I think if I hadn't have had that experience, I probably wouldn't have even known there was a choice.
No.
You know, and I would have been a bit more insular. Possibly.
Well, it's interesting you describing that, because you mentioned family and systems. And of course there's a therapy approach called internal family systems.
Indeed.
IFS. And we absorb these kinds of messages as parts of ourself, and they are giving us rules. Sometimes they can be very helpful, sometimes they might be quite restrictive, but we absorb this. They become part of our psyche. And you talking about those sort of family rules from your perspective was reminding me, with my mother, bless her, when I was growing up in London in the 50s and 60s, we lived in a maisonette. It was a ground floor maisonette. and it didn't have a proper bathroom, and it had a toilet that was outside but was part of the building, as it were. So it wasn't the privy down the bottom of the garden or anything like that, but it was an outside toilet.
Yeah, yeah.
And my mum was really concerned about having any visitors, especially people who weren't family, immediate family, because of the fact we didn't have a bathroom and didn't have an indoor toilet. It was, you had to go out and back in again, as it were, and blooming cold in the winter. And so we never really had visitors or anything like that. And I grew up not with this sort of fear of the toilet, I suppose, or having an outside toilet, but I certainly, when I got my own place, it had to be a place with a bathroom and things like that. But I think the sort of the way it influenced me was to be fairly, let's say, I'll use it, it's a negative phrase, but antisocial.
Okay.
Not one that was in welcoming people in and inviting people in, but very much sort of self-contained. And interestingly, one of my cousins on my dad's side, who I'm sort of in regular contact with nowadays, she used to love visiting our place because it was different, because it had this outside toilet.
Yes.
But my mum never knew that.
No.
But she thought, oh, I love coming to your place because it was different to everybody else's.
Yeah.
And so there's all those things floating around that we just don't know about, but they shape us.
They do.
And sometimes we're aware of it, and sometimes we just play out, if I can use that phrase, these behaviours, these views, these beliefs, whatever they are, unconsciously, subconsciously. And they can affect other people, they can affect how we are in our day-to-day life. And that can lead to, oh no, I mustn't do that because what if, da-da-da-da-da. But we're not saying it in our heads necessarily. Or even if we're saying it out loud, we don't realise we're saying it.
No.
Until someone else says, did you realise that you always,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think sometimes with the people I see, that if they become a parent, then they can have comparison of how they were parented.
Yes.
And I think those things come into very stark reminders, which it did for me when I became a parent. That's when this open door policy came around.
Yeah, yeah.
And up until then, I'd not even consciously thought about it, and I didn't reflect on it until I became a counsellor in that process. But I think that aspect of them being a dad and having children then made me realise those two positions of me and how I was parented. And I think then I had more choices, if that makes sense.
Oh, of course it does. And I think I've had clients who, perhaps because as they were growing up, they saw how their friends' parents behaved, and they were doing the comparing and contrasting and thinking, well, it doesn't have to be the way it's been with my parents.
Yeah.
And we're assuming there's been negative things. And especially, as you rightly say, when they become a parent, they're determined not to be like their parents.
Indeed.
So they'll go the other way deliberately, because they've seen the consequences and they've seen how it can be, and so they've had the benefit of being able to compare and contrast. I think in a way, to some extent, you were describing. My friends don't do this. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'll have some of that, please. And so again, if we can have that exposure at the right time to other ways of being, doing, whatever, then that can prime the pump, can feed the ideas. Oh, right, okay, let's try this. Oh, that worked out all right. I like that.
Yeah.
I'll do more of that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that when I became a dad, I kind of pushed the pendulum from choice right over the other way.
Yeah.
So when we grew up on a council estate. We didn't have much money, and we didn't certainly have a lot of presents and things. We didn't have parties and things.
Yeah.
But then when I became a dad, I kind of bought anything and everything I could.
Yes.
Over the top.
Almost. Yeah. You overcompensate.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And swing the other way.
Yeah.
Which is understandable, and then perhaps drift back from that as
once you realise it.
Yes.
And I realised it one Christmas when we had a dining room and we had a living room, and the kids were all in the living room, opening the presents and all that kind of stuff, and had all the stuff. And then I was setting the table for dinner, for Christmas dinner. And I went into the dining room and realised there was an Atari computer.
Oh, wow.
If you can remember Atari computers.
Yes.
There was an Atari computer sat there, hadn't even been looked at, and that was the biggest Christmas gift. It was like in front of me on this table, and I was going to wheel it in. I'd forgot all about it. The kids were as happy as Larry with what they've got.
Yeah.
The Atari was me.
Yeah.
My process of
Oh,
need.
yes.
Nothing to do with the kids.
Yeah.
But that process of thinking about that and remembering that made me realise that I'd pushed that pendulum far too far.
Yeah.
I'd overcompensated.
Yeah.
Because nobody else needed that.
Well, I suppose in a way it's a bit of the sort of classic tale of that you can buy Christmas presents for kids. I mean, I don't have children, so I can't really speak personally. And the thing they like most is the box that it came in. And they'll play with that as happy as anything, and they're not bothered about the actual toys. And of course, a lot of that stuff is driven by the marketing, the advertising, and the firms wanting to sell product.
Yeah. Commercialism.
And do we need it? Do we want it? What really matters?
Yeah.
All of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Going back to choice and decisions, I find that when I start trying to help people understand where they want to go, what they want to do, whether it be career coaching or choice and decisions in their life, if we strip out initially that how will this affect other people thinking, not necessarily verbalizing, but thinking, then it becomes much easier to make the choice and decision, because those interruptions in our thinking, if you like, of how will that person be affected by that, kind of can be parked. That's not to say that the choice and decision they've put down on paper is the one they're going to do, but it kind of gives them where they are and where they might be, and somewhere in the middle is kind of possibly where they're going to get to.
Yes, I don't disagree with you, but for me, I think we can look at things in this sort of logical, rational way. Say, yeah, I realise what's going on here. That doesn't make sense. I could do this, whatever it is. But then there is the visceral, emotional, sensory, more mammalian brain stuff. Thinking back to our previous podcast, that is saying, whoa, no, don't go there. No, don't do that. And we're back to that internal battle.
We are.
And yes, you can perhaps change the mammalian brain stuff, but you're doing it in a sort of top-down way and trying to bludgeon it into submission. By having to keep telling yourself.
Interesting way of putting it.
Well, yeah, and trying things out. And yeah, if you try something and you engineer it for success, but small steps and all of that, then things can change, and you can begin to see things differently. But I think that can be quite a long process. And again, I would say this, wouldn't I, with my EMDR trauma head on, if you can process those underlying messages and resolve them, then I do believe you don't have to bludgeon that part into submission. It sorts it out itself, and you have the chance of changing things faster than might be otherwise the case. Because those in themselves, if they've set up these messages, they set up a pattern of reactions. Well, that fits my idea of the trauma model. Not what is the event, but what has it done to you? How does it get played out? Because we can, the trauma patterns can include these cognitions, these negative beliefs. I can't do this, I'm responsible for that, I mustn't do the other, whatever it is. And you can work with that in a trauma way as opposed to any other way. But, because I'm a passionate believer in this kind of approach, I would say that, wouldn't I?
Well, you're probably more going down that path than other paths.
Yes.
Let's put it that way. I realised that with my world, my life, with my dad, who never really interacted with us. He would always take himself off, on holidays on his own to read in the reading lounge and wouldn't necessarily interact. And I found that as I grew up, a lot of resentment with that, because there wasn't a connection.
No.
But then I started doing some family history background, mid-30s, late 30s, family trees and things. And I kind of did some exploration around that. And our family never talked about stuff.
No.
Skeletons in the closet kind of
families
thing.
did they?
No, they never did. Which was a bit weird, but it is what it is. And I realised by doing some family background history that he had lost his dad at about the age of 4 or 5. And he was the only lad.
Right.
He had 3 sisters and his mum.
Yep.
Mum never remarried, never was with anybody else. So he was the baby of the family.
Yeah.
But didn't have a father role model.
No.
And so when he became a father,
Yeah.
and bearing in mind I was the youngest,
Yeah.
his process was not to interact with me.
No.
And I don't think that was necessarily because he didn't want to be interacting with me.
No.
I think it's because he didn't understand how to.
No, he wouldn't.
Because he had not that model of
He wouldn't know.
understanding what a dad is.
And I think it's become a lot more evident in recent times that we have to be on the receiving end of these kinds of interactions, relational patterns, in order to know how to do it to ourselves, first of all. And that's the low self-esteem stuff.
Yeah.
But then also to other people. And if you don't receive it, you don't know what to do.
No.
And you don't consciously do this. It's all part of the pattern. And that's how these kinds of situations, they can occur, they play out in terms of how the person is with themselves and their own behaviours. It plays out in the interactions with other people. And yes, it can cause resentment because we don't know, but then the individual doesn't know.
No.
And it's not to blame them, they're just a product of what happened. And sadly, that event had, by the sounds of it, a major impact on your dad.
Indeed.
And what a shame.
Yeah.
For him, for you, for other family members, probably your mum as well,
I would
and
think so.
other members of the family.
Yeah.
And, that's where that event happened. I'm back on my own topic. That event happened and has sat there.
Indeed.
Playing out.
Yeah.
In all sorts of ways. And yeah, it helps if we have that knowledge and we have that awareness, and we can perhaps try and avoid doing those behaviours, but it might feel back to this sort of the cognitive versus the emotional. Yeah, logically, I'm hypothesizing here, your dad could have had the awareness and known what was going on, but it might have still felt viscerally very difficult, or if possible, to do it.
Yeah.
Because he just didn't know what to do.
No.
So there's a much more sensory aspect to it.
It gave me an indicator, though, which I use now with the work I do when I'm coming across situation scenarios similar to this. I say, well, what I experienced, and I don't do personal kind of reflection with clients, but what I realised was that he wasn't doing this to me.
No.
He was doing this because of.
Yes.
And that removed a whole range of emotional, interactive, negative processing between me and him.
Yeah.
And it made it a lot easier to connect and talk and share.
Yeah.
Because I'd moved that process in my head, which is kind of what you think, what you're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's moving that emotional reaction process into an understanding.
Oh, yes.
You know?
And of course, once we understand better what's happened, what it's like for that other person, we can begin to see things as if we're in their shoes. We don't know what it's like for them because we're not them.
No.
But we can be more empathic and understanding because it explains things.
Indeed.
Rather than just blaming the person as if they're doing it deliberately or singling you out or whatever it is.
Which it felt like.
Yeah, of course
until
it
that
does.
awareness came around.
Of course.
So once I'd kind of brought that awareness in, I could then make a different choice.
Yeah.
I could choose to connect, to talk, to share.
Yeah.
Because that negative emotional process that I'd had for most of my certainly young adult life had actually dissipated.
And that is a natural automatic reaction. You feel hurt.
Mm.
You feel it's deliberate.
Yeah, yeah.
It's directed against you.
Indeed.
And yes, hopefully those sorts of awarenesses come to light whilst there's still time to do something about it, rather than after it's too late.
Yeah. I suppose in the moment though, when it's being directed at you, but not because of you, you really can't see that, can you?
No, we take all these things personally.
Of course, yeah.
Of course we do.
It must be us.
Well, you know, it happens when we're driving. Someone who's a bad driver, they're doing it personally to you.
They're cutting you up.
Exactly.
It's not that they're trying to get to a hospital.
No, they know nothing about you, and they're not even considering you. They're just thinking about themselves, perhaps, or whatever it is. You don't know. Again, you don't know what's going on for them.
No, indeed.
So yeah, difficult.
So making those choices for me was a needing to be educated and have a different understanding of the process, and that reduced a lot of the restrictions in a lot of ways, actually, to be fair, in me going into counselling and going into the therapy business, if you like, because that awareness had never been there until I'd made those kind of connections. But helping other people make those connections is kind of, I suppose, what I'm into, you know.
Well, of course, that is part of our role, isn't it, as therapists? It's a shame, in a way, maybe, I don't know if it is now, but let's assume it isn't. It's a shame that children, as part of education, we don't learn about this kind of thing, these kinds of issues. So we have more of that interactive awareness and what's going on and how our part in this and how it can affect others, so that we perhaps can react a bit differently in the, you know, with friends and family. I know when after my dad died, which was about 1999, I remember saying to myself almost out loud that I didn't feel I really knew my father. He was a very private person, but I did find out all sorts of things from a former friend of his who'd gone through the World War II with him. They ended up in the same regiment. And I learnt an awful lot about him through this friend. And I wish I'd known that many years ago. I think that would have had a major difference on my interactions with him. Because he was very much a closed book. And if you tried to inquire, the shutters came down even more so. So he was quite difficult to know. I mean, he was a good father in all the standard things. And certainly with my therapy training and experiences and things like that, I now look back on those kinds of experiences and think, I wonder, I wish I could go back and ask him and have those kinds of conversations, assuming he'd be willing to talk about it. And I do the same with my mother. I suppose with me, perhaps, who knows what I would have been like if I'd gone down the psychotherapy road 20 years earlier than I did. You know, as I said, it's a second career relatively late in life. I started doing it in my early 50s. But it's helped me. I didn't do it for this reason, but I've certainly become more aware of my interactions, my behaviours. Hopefully I've changed some of them.
Work in progress.
Work in progress. Well, you'll have to tell me, because you know, as an outsider looking in, you know, through other environments, we have contact with each other. So maybe you'll have to take me aside one day and tell me.
I wouldn't dream of doing that, Paul.
Did you realise, Paul, you do this when you do that?
Yeah. But sometimes you need other people to give you that input, don't you?
Oh, of course you do.
Because you can't be objective in your own life, can you?
No, of course not. I've used the phrase that when you're in the forest, you can't see the trees. You just know you're surrounded by a load of woodwork, and it's very helpful to be on the outside of the trees looking in and be able to see what's going on, or have a chance to see what's going on in that more objective, detached way, rather than just be in the thick of it yourself. And
Being battered by all this stuff.
yes, and living from moment to moment and just getting through the day.
So I suppose wrapping it up, the choices that we make, we need to try to reflect on our needs and
Yes.
maybe on paper put them first, and then see where our restrictive process is, and then somewhere in the middle might be where we want to get to.
Yes, I fully agree with that, but I wonder just how many of us are equipped to do that.
Well,
Whether you blame it on the family, the parents, education, whatever it is, I suspect most of us just don't do that because we don't.
No.
We react. We toss a coin. We do something. We succumb to external pressures and go along with it for the need to belong, for fear of being ostracized, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But without all that conscious awareness. And it's only if you do this kind of work, have this kind of training, do that, encouraged to do that reflection, or you know you've got an issue and you seek outside help of the right kind, which in itself can be a sort of interesting. Do you start to do it?
Yeah.
So, but in an ideal world, yes, I wish we were all equipped to be able to reflect more, consider more, but sadly, I don't think we are.
And most of the time, no, I don't think we are. I think we just do what we do.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily reflect on it.
No.
To be fair.
We do what we do because we're told to do it, or it'd be good for us,
Yeah.
or because we're told we mustn't do the opposite,
Yeah.
or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And these are all the rules that we absorb.
I have speaking about coins and flipping a coin,
Oh yeah.
I have a very novel way of kind of bringing that to some kind of understanding. And it's something I used years ago when I first started. I get people to kind of think about the two choices, whatever the choices are. And I say, okay, sit with it and see how you feel now without making a choice.
Yes.
Flip a coin.
Yeah.
Heads is that, tails is that.
Yeah.
And when you go like that, what's your immediate gut feeling?
Yes.
And that emotional process
Yes.
of, oh, sugar.
Yeah.
oh, that's good.
That's right.
Kind of gives you an idea.
And that's that gut reaction
Indeed.
to the choice rather than the cognitive-y, rational, logical kind of process.
Yeah, that's got all those restrictive
Yeah.
aspects,
Yeah.
you know. And I've done that a few times nowadays. And it's a really interesting process to use. And the clients are always going, oh, that's different.
Yeah.
I say, well, you know, it is what it is. You know. But flicking the coin's a good one for me.
And I think that's where it is useful as therapists to have these kinds of techniques, tricks, interventions up your sleeve to be able to, and we'll all use different ones that suit our own personality,
Indeed.
but to be able to spot in the moment when the client is wrestling with something, oh, what about this? Try that. What's your reaction? How does that feel to you? What's the gut reaction in that moment? No thinking, just what happens?
Yeah,
Then
yeah.
what?
Yeah, indeed. Oh, it's a conversation starter, isn't it?
Yes.
It might not lead to the end result.
Well, it can then unfold and you unpick and
Yeah, indeed.
explore further.
You know, and certainly with career coaching, when I'm looking at what people might want to do with their life, with their career, and they don't know what they want, I kind of like say to, okay, so write down the negatives of where you are now. You know, what don't you like about your career? What don't you like about your role, your job, the way you work or whatever? And then flip it 180 degrees. And it won't give you the answer, but it might give you a different idea of looking at it.
Yes.
So, for example, if somebody was working in an enclosed room like we are today, and they now hate being enclosed, they want the outside.
Yeah.
Well, I don't like that environment that I'm working in, so flip it. I want to be outside. I want to have light.
Yeah.
So going that and writing all those things down can give you a plan of what might be more attractive. You know, it's not the answer, but it might give you ideas about an answer. You know.
And I think as well that highlights how if someone's struggling, if you're thinking careers, but it can be applied to other things, what's not helpful is say, so, well, what do you want to do instead? What do you want to do differently?
Yeah.
But they don't know.
No.
And if they knew that, well, that was easy then.
It would be, wouldn't it?
Yes. And that's not really a helpful question.
No.
And it puts pressure on the individual.
Indeed.
And so, yes, whether it's, well, flip it over, what don't you like about what you do now? Or maybe asking, well, drift back through time. Has anything coming up for you when you really enjoyed something? You know, connecting in with the passion, the interest, the enthusiasm. What presses their buttons can be helpful. But again, it's what works for the individual and what suits the therapist. And
you can see that though in the room, can't you?
Yeah.
When their face changes, their facial features light up, and they become more animated.
Yes.
About the thing that they're talking about.
Yeah.
And you can go, oh yeah, okay.
Well, that's why
that's something.
As therapists, I think we really do have to have our antennae switched on and twitching, so that we're listening to the change in tone.
Indeed.
Looking at the face, and if you're seeing the whole person, you're working in person, any other bits of the body language, but you don't have to have that.
No.
Listening to that, the way the language changes.
Yes.
Picking up on all those little clues. Oh, hello. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, let's stop here. I'm curious about this. Did you realise you were just reacting like that?
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Yeah.
What was going on for you at that moment? What did that feel like?
Indeed.
Those kinds of questions.
Zeroing in on it.
Zeroing in. But you've got to be interactive.
You do.
And not be afraid to do that.
And that antennae that we all have, I think, to a lesser or greater degree, depending on how we're working, I think everything is something in the room.
Yeah.
Nothing is nothing.
No.
Whether we understand it or not understand it is immaterial in a sense.
Yeah.
But it is part of the process.
Yeah.
And our antennae of picking up all those small nuances, those small differences, can help us help the client.
Yeah.
By pointing them out.
And noticing the things, and of course noticing our own reactions as well when we're hearing things.
Indeed.
We can become more interested and excited based on what the client's saying, or we can become less interested and switched off. So what's going on there?
Indeed. Yeah.
Countertransference and all those things.
Yes. All that technical stuff.
All that stuff, yes.
Well, it's been great talking with you, Paul.
Likewise.
I've really enjoyed that. I don't know if we kept on topic, or we went off topic, or we ever got
what
back
the topic was.
But hopefully you found it interesting, and hopefully you found that there were some ideas and some things that you could kind of connect to. Please like and share the podcast if you liked it, and if you've got any feedback, obviously give me it on the channels that we use. And I look forward to seeing you again, and thank you again, Paul, for coming in.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm Ian Wallace, the Messed Up Counsellor. Take care. Look after yourself.